agenda, I'll zoom out and talk about what effective kind of go-to-market looks like in 2022. It's a real intro. You might have heard this in a couple of webinars recently, and it will be brief. We'll then look at the state of the market, like how did we get here and where we're at today in terms of email and outbound and personalization. We're then going to have some fun looking at some personalized emails I've received over the years that some of you guys may recognize or may have sent yourselves. We'll talk about the type of behavior and the performance that these types of really personal messages drive. And then we'll give you some examples of this new approach, this kind of hyper-relevant approach, and some of the benefits that I think it can yield you throughout your kind of end-to-end commercial funnel before we kind of conclude at the end. That work for everyone in terms of an agenda? See some nodding heads, cool. So zooming out very briefly, maybe before we get into the weeds of relevancy, I posed a question in a recent webinar for Notion asking, what's the most effective thing we can nail as an account-based kind of go-to-market team in 2022? And we had some great answers around driving activity, success with direct dials, and more. But I think we as a group ultimately concluded that folks delivering sales or marketing touch points to the right customers at the right time with the right message was this kind of Goldilocks formula for go-to-market, right? If we nail those three things, we're on the right tracks, albeit something that's easier said than done. But what do we mean by right customer, right time, right message? By right customer, we mean mapping the market of customers you can truly sell to. Too much time today is wasted prospecting companies we ultimately disqualify or don't meet some basic criteria we need to be able to sell to them. You want to start by mapping the market at every company you can sell to and those who meet a minimum criteria for our companies as buyers, I guess. By right time, we mean focusing our attention and efforts on those companies who are demonstrating the greatest need for our products right now. We all have a limited number of XDRs, a limited amount of ad spend, especially in 2022 with hiring freezes taking place and finance teams cutting our budgets. And as such, we don't want our team to determine which accounts they work at random or enroll in campaigns at random. Instead, we want to focus our efforts on those who have the highest propensity to buy. And then by right message, we mean having mapped the market and identified the companies who are most likely to buy. We want to deliver the most compelling message that we can to that company or that persona. And this is what we're going to be zeroing in on today. And at this point for Notion, maybe to set the scene, we've ran articles and webinars on right customer. We've run articles and webinars on right time. And then today we're doing the same for right message. And perhaps Claire can link you to some of those other bits of content if you haven't already seen them, because they kind of set the scene and it's a nice build as to how we go to market. Before we get into this kind of right message piece and hyper-relevancy, whenever I put these three concepts in front of people, I always do like to do around the room on where folks have spent most of their time. So if anyone's willing to stick a 1, 2, or 3 in the chat, or right customer, right time, right message in the chat, that would be awesome. Just to see where you guys are spending most of your time, just opening up the chat for me. In my experience, whilst you're filling those out, folks tend to spend most of their time on number 1 during fundraising, when trying to convince someone to invest in their product, or during, say, like FY23 planning, when you're building your books of business. Less time tends to be spent on number 2, like the scoring and prioritization piece. This is something that we talk about as being a quite underutilized kind of tool in the account-based kind of go-to-market approach. But then a huge amount of time tends to be spent on number 3, right? It's a permanent topic of conversation for BDRs, BDR managers to work out how they can deliver the best message they can. Even now, looking at the chat, I've got one from Caleb, a good friend, and then a hell of a lot of 3s in the chat. So I guess the question I asked myself was why? Like, why do we actually spend so much time on number 3? The right message piece, right? Fortunately, this is what we're talking about today. But why do we do so? I think one of the reasons we spend so much time trying to craft these incredible emails, sequences or cadences, whatever taxonomy you use, is because of the state of the market, right? The sales engagement market is absolutely booming. Perhaps again, folks could throw in the chat which of these tools they use or any other tools they'd recommend, because I imagine there's a ton. But to wheel off some of those on the screen, we've got Outreach. Outreach announced their Series E funding of $200 million, $4.4 billion valuation in June 21, just before we started to see those revenue multiples regress to kind of a historic mean. But hugely impressive nonetheless, right? This business was founded 8 years ago. Good friends with the now VP of EMEA. I've even had the pleasure of meeting their highest performing rep globally, who I'm sure have very strong opinions on this kind of right message topic that we're talking about today. But a truly fantastic company and a great success story, right? Next to them, we've got SalesLoft, a direct competitor outreach, slightly longer in the tooth. I think they're a couple of years older. But Visa Equity took a majority stake in SalesLoft at a $2.3 billion valuation, right? This was a 23x revenue multiple, supposedly, which maybe was a smart move for SalesLoft before we saw those valuations start to drop a little bit. Then we've got Groove, Apollo, Reply.io, Mixmax. Between them, they've raised over $225 million. Apollo alone have raised 151, just shy of that unicorn status, according to Crunchbase, right? All of these companies are doing a great job on two fronts. So first and foremost, they've made it easier than ever for us to enroll target prospects or accounts and sequences as sales teams, right? They tend to focus less on the marketing side and much more so on the sales side of that account-based kind of funnel. But because of the success and how easy they made that, I also did a little bit of research into how much email we're actually sending today. So the stats I could pull were from 2020, yeah, exactly. So at that point, we were sending over $300 billion, not billion dollar, that just rolls off the tongue, 300 billion emails were being sent per day. And we saw a sharp rise in that figure throughout the pandemic, and things haven't slowed down. There were over 4 billion users of email globally in the same year in 2020, while folks in business are on averaging receiving 121 emails per day into their inboxes. I won't dare ask who thinks they're receiving more, because I imagine it's most of us. I'm pretty sure I woke up to over 121 emails just this morning. But thanks to these tools, it's easier than ever to deliver an email sequence or a cadence, right, to prospects or the accounts that you're trying to target. But as a result, it's harder than ever to stand out from the crowd, right? So what did they do next? What happened next, right? SalesLoft outreach and those in adjacent verticals like Gong or my good friends Ed and Ryan over at Mutiny, they spotted we were receiving more email than ever, right? So the next thing those companies started to do really, really well was coaching people on how to send the best messages they possibly could, right? They wanted to help them stand out from the crowd. And as such, I'm sure many of you will have seen content like this, right? Like 5 killer sales email examples, 6 cold email examples that you want to steal, how to write a sales email, what does the data say, 10 free sales email templates, how to write a follow-up email, should I use GIFs in my marketing emails, 3 data-driven best practices. Everybody was getting a hell of a lot of email and getting a lot of advice on how to send great emails. But what did people really do to stand out from the crowd? And what was the common thread that people like tugged on in some of this advice, right? What did they do? They got personal, right? They started sending what are known as hyper-personal or highly personalized emails. But why did they do this? Like, why did they think it was going to work? I guess from my perspective, people don't like to get spammed, right? They like to think their email is being sent from a human to them and they've been targeted specifically based on a need. Maybe they personalize as a chance to brighten our days, make us laugh, or massage our ego as a buyer for their particular product. And they're going to spend a little bit more time on the emotional response to these kind of personalized emails in just a few moments. First, I just want to pause and be very thankful that in my last webinar of the year, I finally got to use this Michael Jordan meme where he talks about things getting personal. It's been a personal goal of mine throughout this year, so I'm glad I can tick that off and move into 2023 as a new man. Thank you for your patience with me. If you haven't watched The Last Dance on Netflix, you definitely should. I needed to get that one out of the way. We're going to talk more about that personalization and the feelings it evokes in just a second. But before I dive kind of any further, I just want to publicly share my love for all of the XDRs out there. That we can all take a moment to just express that gratitude. I think the XDR's job is one of the hardest in the company, right? They are relentless, amazing people, and I'm super proud to have walked in some of their shoes maybe in the early days at Paddle. I actually saw a pretty cool LinkedIn post on XDRs just earlier this week. It says that your company's first impression, the first touch point a company has with your business, and they get direct feedback from prospects and they share that with the org. If you aren't using your XDRs today to understand qualitatively what the field are talking about, that's something you should definitely do. They're social animals. I'm pretty sure all of us can attest to this. I can just about, I think, keep up with the XDRs that I know and love today, but that's getting harder with every year that passes and every grey hair that emerges on my head. But one thing that stood out to me was that our XDRs are also our company's pipeline for talent, right? I think at least 3 of those that we hired at Paddle back in the day have gone on to launch their own successful businesses. We've got a couple that have moved into VC and a few that I think have just stuck around and rolled because they're just so damn good at it, right? There's no shame in that either. My current co-founder of GoodFit, actually, I hired straight out of university into what we called at the time a lead development rep role, which was like a full-time researcher of data for businesses that got handed over to the SDRs to do their outreach. he hit his target in like 4 weeks, ran a company hackathon, and thought a way to programmatically gather data because his peers were so unhappy doing the manual research, right? These people are awesome and intelligent people. I love them. They are awesome. Let's all just take a moment to appreciate the XDRs that exist in our businesses. And I thought it was important to call that out because we're going to talk about an evolution in the way these folks can do things, right? I think there's a few SDR managers I've seen on the call. I've seen some names that I recognize there. And we're not here to criticize what's happening today, but talk about how we can continue to raise our game to the next level in terms of this outbound messaging that we're delivering, right? And as discussed today, in order to stand out, our innovative BDR teams are trying all sorts of cool, wonderful things to get our attention. Has anyone seen this one? Like, this one's pretty common these days, I'd say. Like putting your name on digital signage. It tends to be like a digital sign like this one, or a piece of paper they've kind of handwritten your name into. I don't know if anyone's seen this or sent one of these. I think I had about 7 of these in my inbox when I was trying to gather some content for this particular webinar. Maybe it's something you'll recognize if you've been sold to as an executive or a manager before. Did anyone see this one? This was the trend where folks were delivering messages to buyers via Spotify playlists, right? I think this was something even some of the folks at Paddle tried. Like, there's some hilarious examples, if anybody can dig them out or maybe share anything that they've seen in the chat. This one example I found was from a recruiter, so not strictly an outbound, maybe B2B sales team, but they were using it in the same way. They've got this playlist name that they've created saying, "We need you." The songs are "You're awesome," "We need you," "On the team," "When you're ready, come and get it," "With kind regards, your friends, PS, you're so cool," right? This is funny, right? This is going to stand out. It's going to make you laugh. You're going to remember this particular email. But when I was preparing for this and wanting to talk about the cool things we've seen with personalization and how they can evolve, I immediately thought back to an email that I received in 2018 that I remember so vividly, right? It shows you the power of personalization. I could immediately recall this email that I wanted to share with you guys. And you can see it on screen. It was a LinkedIn message, in fact. But at the time, the dude who sent this was an account executive, actually, at a company that I knew very well at the time I received the message. And he's since gone on to become a BDR manager, a go-to-market consultant. I think he owns the P&L responsibility for over 100 staff. Like, as an individual, an incredible story. But looking at the message, firstly, he knew I was from Bedford. Not strictly true. I went to school there, but I appreciate he's probably done that research on LinkedIn. That's a tick in terms of personalization. He's put that effort in. But next, he also knew that I was into the band, the Libertines. Like, great band if anyone's interested, but I have no idea how he found this out. I may or may not have a Libertines tattooed somewhere on my person. Fortunately, he didn't go that far in terms of his personalization, but I have no idea how he found out that I love this band, right? But anyway, he even in his email said that he was going to send me a book on the Libertines, right? That book still sits proudly in my lounge even today. Like, it's still sat down there and I have it on display. What a kind dude, right? But funnily enough, I replied to this email and gave him my office address so he could send me the book. And we engaged in a discussion, right? As an aside, direct mail as a tactic is something that people are using increasingly commonly, and it's really successful, whether that's sending gifts or whatever it may be. I spoke to the COO of ReachDesk quite recently, and they've raised $50 million after bootstrapping for their first 3 or 4 years, just due to the demand for products like theirs that allow you to deliver things like books to prospects. So if ReachDesk isn't something you've looked at before, highly recommended as a part of your stack, and I check it out. Now, for the group, the question I'd ask you is, how do you feel in receiving emails like the ones we've just discussed, right? Like, throw some feelings or some ideas in the chat, maybe some prompts for you, like, how does receiving an email like this make you feel? How does it make you feel about the sender? And how does it influence your likelihood to respond, I guess, right? Feel free to share any bits in the chat. Maybe as you're thinking about that for yourself, some prompts for me would be, it definitely makes me feel like a human has sent this message, right? I've done some manual research. I've not been enrolled in some mass scale newsletter. It makes me feel like they probably care enough to have looked into me, my interests, my business, which is pretty cool. Maybe they made me laugh, right? The Spotify playlists were really, really good. Like, I genuinely recommend you Googling them. Maybe they brightened up my day a little bit, my grey Tuesday morning. Certainly caught my attention, right? Maybe even I feel guilty, right? I took a free book and didn't buy that product. It's like, shame on me, I know. Sorry to the AE BDR who was working that. I hope you forgive me. But these are some of the emotions that we might feel. Phil Green says he'd be compelled to reply. Grace Corby says she's flattered by the fact that we've taken the time to research you. We shouldn't underestimate the flattery or the ability to massage the ego of the prospect that we're actually selling to, right? I think, whilst I think the way we need to evolve sending outbound email needs to evolve, I think remembering this feeling and delivering this feeling to the recipient remains super, super important, because it's this sentiment that we're just talking about right now that drives us to respond, per Phil Green's comment, right, in the chat. And it's this feeling which encourages us to go and book that meeting, right? So that's really important. And I want you to just hold that thought, hold these sentiments as we start to move forward, because I'm going to come back to it in just a few moments, right? The next set of questions I want you to ask yourselves is, who is delivering these emails typically, right? And again, let us know in the chat, but most commonly, teams have dedicated XDRs doing this stuff. I say XDRs because people call themselves weird and wonderful things these days. Sales development reps, business development reps, new business associates. There used to be a bit of a trend where people were even worried to call themselves salespeople, which I think people have slowly moved on from, which is good, but people call themselves weird and wonderful things. But at some point, the efficiency gain is there for this to be someone's full-time job, to try and build that top of funnel for you guys and create that demand per the kind of predictable revenue setup that you'll have heard from Aaron Ross's predictable revenue, which has been popular for many years now. So that's who's delivering the messages. The next question I'd ask yourselves is, how do we quota these reps, right? Maybe you guys could throw in your weird, wonderful ideas in the chat, but typically it's sales accepted leads or sales accepted demos, sales accepted meetings, things of this nature. And that means a slightly different thing to each company. But TLDR, we've got XDRs delivering these personalized messages, and we're quoting them on meetings booked or demos that have been turned up to, or something similar along those lines. Ultimately, it's the early stages of the funnel. So what happens when these two things are true? What happens is we start optimizing for target hitting, right? That's kind of what targets are for. Targets drive behavior. And if we set targets to encourage higher response rates in meetings booked, that's exactly what our teams will focus on and optimize for, right? Less care, but less care and attention will be taken by the BDR or the XDR. Later down the funnel, they're focusing on the response rate and the meeting booked rate. And there's often a drop off later in the funnel when it comes to new business, because this is not what we've got them focused on, right? Again, you might want to tweak your targets to think about that depending on your sales cycle, but quota setting is maybe a topic for a different day. What does this mean for our message? It means that we don't necessarily care if the customer buys and becomes closed won. We care if they book the meeting if I'm an SDR, because that's what put foods on the table or pays my rent. Again, I'm being short here for example's sake. I have no doubt we've got amazing members in our team who want the company to be successful, who want to be successful in their careers. I'm trying to just articulate a point here that we've really got these folks focused on the very early stages and the top of the funnel, right? So now let's think back to how we were feeling when we received that personalized email. Maybe the rep made us laugh, right? Caleb said he will only reply to someone if they personalize an email. Grace said she was flattered by the amount of time that they spent researching us and our interests, and maybe they feel guilty. I certainly do, because they sent us a free book, right? These are some of the feelings that we had in receiving that personalized message. So what's happening? How are we behaving? We're basically booking the meeting based on a feeling versus a business need, right? We're happy to give something back to the rep. They've given us 30 minutes of their time researching us and our business. Why don't we give them 15 minutes back, right? That's the good thing to do. Maybe we walked in their shoes many years ago or a couple of years ago, and we want to give them a hand, right? We respond based on how we're feeling, not necessarily because we have a need for their product, right? Which is why you start to see some of the drop off at the later stages of the funnel, where people start to really objectively evaluate whether they're going to get ROI on the investment into your product and your business offering. Now, of course, often we'll do some research before attending that meeting. We're all informed, highly prepared, executives and managers, of course. And quite often we'll jump on the phone, having been targeted effectively, and go on to buy the product. Don't get me wrong. Perhaps a rep runs a great challenger sale on why we need their solution. Perhaps a rep runs a call where he knows we're using, or she knows we're using, a competitor and runs a great displacement campaign. I'm not saying that the companies who book meetings after sending personalized email, you don't ever convert. Of course they do. Otherwise, none of us would be here. The question I'd like to ask yourselves is there a better way, right? Is there a way that's going to perform better across that funnel that we were just looking at, right? The question I get you to ask yourselves is, can we book meetings with those or for those who have an observable need for our product, right? And better yet, can we do so without negatively impacting the response rate and that meeting booked rate that we're optimizing for as XDRs? if that makes any sense, right? Do they have a need for our product and the value that we deliver? This is where we start to move into this concept of relevancy over personalization, right? Personalization for me, and these are my definitions, is delivering a message personalized to the recipient, their interests, their background, maybe a recent podcast they've been on, right? Hyper-relevancy is delivering a message based on the observable need of the business, right? Again, these are my definitions, but with me so far, we all making sense? I'm going to give you some examples of this in just a few minutes. I see some nodding heads, so that's good. Throw some questions in the chat if you have them. I'll answer them as I go, or we'll certainly have some time at the end to answer some of those as well. So here we've talked about the slight difference though between personalization and relevancy. Now, in researching for this webinar, I also looked across Outreach, Sales.com, Mutiny's websites for some inspiration and some content to see if others were talking about this. And I came across this graphic on the Mutiny website. You can obviously see it on screen there. And I think they're working along some really similar lines, right? In terms of what drives those great responses, right? So on the horizontal axis, we've got the amount of pain the customer is in right now. And on the vertical axis is our ability to articulate how we solve that pain. And then the top right, they say this is where you're going to get your highest response rates, or where you start to see response rates go through the roof, right? If we find customers who are in great pain or have a great need for our product, and we can articulate how we solve that need or that pain, we will see high response rates, right? It seems really obvious when you spell it out. The reason I think it's important though is that I think we've spent so much time trying to put, I don't know, names on digital screens or build playlists to catch someone's attention. And all of these things are awesome and additive and helpful. But I think absolutely nothing can overcome finding the right customer at the right time, i.e. when they have the greatest need for your product, and then being able to articulate how you solve for that need, like delivering a message based on that need, right? Doing that effectively is always going to trump a smart subject line or an email tip and trick. I'm going to run through some examples of how companies could use hyper-relevancy in their kind of outbound messaging. Now, all of these examples I've written myself for the purpose of this webinar. The templates are not in use. I'm not affiliated with any of the companies I've mentioned at all, other than Paddle, and I'm happy for the Paddle BDRs to listen, still tell me I'm doing a bad job. And they're all largely based on assumptions around the value propositions and ICPs for these businesses, but they should serve as some case studies as to how you can apply observable needs and relevancy in some of your outbound messaging. Sound good with me so far? Yeah. Okay, so case study one, we've got 5 of these, so I'm gonna rattle them off. So the first case study is with Paddle. So for those of you that don't know Paddle, Paddle sells, helps software companies handle payments, particularly internationally, right? We help people sell their products globally. This is one of our core value propositions. So here's an example email that I'm sending to Stephen Millard, who you might all recognize, know and love, who's a very important executive at a fake company. You'll see he's mentioned throughout. But here we're contacting folks based on an observable need, right? I start with the observation. My observation is, I see Stephen and Mr. Company or Mrs. Company, you're getting over 25% of your traffic outside of your HQ in the US, and you're only supporting the English language and USB right now, right? This is the observable need. This is why I'm contacting you. This is what I've noticed, right? My next line in this email is, we help companies like X optimize for this traffic. This is my explanation, my social proof. Like, I am relevant. I can help you convert this traffic that I've observed better. I can help you solve a need that you have, right? And then I have a basic closed question CTA at the end, which is, can I show you a 30-second GIF of this checkout in action, right? You and your BDRs are going to know way better than me what works for you in terms of CTAs. I'm not going to sit here and preach to you, don't have any answers. For me, there are really no silver bullets in outbound email. The most impactful thing is connecting the right customers at the right time with a message based on needs, observable needs, right? And I will litter in some kind of generic advice as we go through, just in case it's going to be helpful. But one thing I have seen used across quite a few companies is this kind of closed CTA at the end of their email. And these closed CTAs require like no thought, right? They're as easy to reply to as yes or a no, and they've worked really effectively for a bunch of folks. At least in the companies I've worked with, and this will be different for everyone, the goal of the first email on reflection is actually to elicit a response from the buyer. And that's because in B2B sales, you're not going to be able to educate that buyer on your entire solution, your entire value proposition, and get them to convert typically over email, right? We need to get them on the phone or a Zoom call in order to do so. And some folks, as a result, choose to go straight in for that meeting booked or in that initial email. What we've seen in the past is that once a prospect has responded to an email, with any response, quite frankly, as long as it's not an unsubscribe or similar, the chances of booking a meeting go up exponentially, right? Versus going direct into trying to book the meeting as your CTA in the email. It's something I'd encourage you to try. And to try and keep that CTA as simple to reply to as yes or no, because it's going to increase your chances of that response. And it's at that point that we'll push for the meeting. That's some generic advice. Give it a try, see if it works for you. The main thing, though, that I want you to take away is that we're outreaching to a company based on an observable need for our product. In this case, Paddle helps software companies sell internationally. So the observable need is based on the traffic, the currencies, and the languages that this company supports. That's obviously very unique to Paddle, and I'm going to give you some other examples in just a second. Let me do one more before we see if there's any questions, because I'm sticking with Paddle in case study 2. So this is a similar idea, right? But I got even more specific in this case, and because we saw internationalization working really well in our sequences at Paddle, and we went a little bit deeper. So in this case, I've seen over 10% of your traffic is coming from China, but you don't support the Chinese yuan, Mandarin, or Alipay. This is what I noticed about you, right? This is the observable need, the first line of the mail. What's the impact of that observation? Your conversions are bad. You're seeing bad conversion for you and your company, which means less revenue. The CTA, can I show you how your checkout will look optimized, right? Very similar to structure to one you've seen before. Again, some generic advice if you're going to try that closed question CTA, try and make it non-committal. If you say that it's going to be 30 seconds, people are much more likely to say yes because they don't feel like they're mis-selling you because they might not have any intention at that point of getting on a call, right? But the real trick, again, we've seen is if you can make the CTA a show you CTA, like, can I show you something? This also works really well. Because if they say yes, you can say, better yet, why didn't I show you over a Zoom call in a tailored demo or something similar, right? If they say no, they're going to give you an objection, which you can also say you're going to handle better over a call, remembering that what we're really trying to do here is get them to reply in order to get them on a phone call. So the show you CTA has been quite an accelerant to that. The initial goal is the email response. The actual goal is the call, view by without a call. In these examples with Paddle, we never even wanted to show them that GIF that we used as the CTA at the end. Like I literally mocked it up via Cloud App, like a little screen recording tool in about 10 minutes. And we used it for years because the idea wasn't actually to send them the thing that I was asking them they wanted to see. The idea was for them to reply and then for me to get them on the Zoom call to actually give them a more tailored demo. That again, the takeaway is we're messaging here based on an observable need for the business. And I'm going to give you some examples that aren't Paddle in just a second. Any questions so far? I don't think I've seen anything in the chat. We all good? Shaking heads? Cool. We've got a few more of these that I'll rattle off. Do throw any questions if you have them in the chat. So the next case study is a bit of a change of scenery. Let's talk about Workato. So maybe some folks here might know them better than me. I picked them at random. But as far as I know, this is a company that helps people with integrations. I think it's basically like an iPaaS solution. They help people roll out integrations for their product and how data flows between those integrations, right? So what's a relevant email I could send if I was Workato targeting a set of businesses, right? The thing that I could observe is I've seen you guys have a bunch of open jobs for developers which are mentioning integrations, right? This is what I observed about the company that I want to sell to. Next, my proof, right? Here's how I help developers roll out integrations super quickly using Workato. This is my solution, proof that I can solve the problem, fix your need, fix your pain. And then I've also got a closed question CTA there of, can I show you a clip of just how easy it is to integrate this stuff? Again, something for you to take away is that hiring data is a great indicator of need. And quite often we have to educate someone around a need that they have. So in the Paddle examples before, sometimes I might need to educate someone they're getting a lot of traffic from China, or they aren't going to convert that traffic very well because they didn't support the payment methods or currencies they needed. Sometimes education and a bit of a challenge of sales needed. But if someone is hiring to solve a problem, they know that they have that problem, right? And if a product solves that problem or enables the person solving that problem, this is awesome because you know they have a need, we've spotted it, we're messaging them at a relevant time because they're literally trying to hire to solve that problem right now. And if you applied the same approach to Paddle, maybe it would be, hey, I see you're hiring for a head of international tax compliance, something that we help with. Can I show you how we handle your tax compliance globally in our dashboard in 2 clicks, for example? I've got no idea. But hiring is a great indicator of need and pain within a business. Make sense? Cool. We'll stick with Workato. So again, remember, they help you with integrations and how data flows between integrations. So the next email I could send as Workato to a business could be, I see that customers are complaining about integrations for your product on G2 Crowd. For those of you that don't know, G2 Crowd is a great aggregator of software businesses where people can leave reviews for those businesses. They even have this cool thing where they tell you, like, you categorize a review in positive and negative, and you can see the sentiment of the thing that they're actually talking about. Anyway, here I said, I can see customers are complaining about integrations to your products on G2 Crowd. Right, this is what I observed. Here's how Workato helps you roll out those integrations quicker, better, faster, easier, right? This is my indication of benefits, my indication of gains, the proof that I can help solve the problem that I've observed for them, the need that I've observed, right? My CTA here is, what's your most requested integration? I'll show you in 30 seconds how we can get that up and running, right? Again, it's a closed question CTA that's really easy to reply to. Like, I probably know, if I'm targeting the right person, what my most requested integration is. It's really easy for me to reply HubSpot or whatever it may be. And even if they don't know, it is really easy for them just to throw any example of that particular BDR if they're interested in hearing more. This is quite different to some of the CTAs that I've sent, again, to stick on the generic advice piece, which I said I try and avoid, which is sometimes I see them signed off with, like, is this of interest, or do you want to hear more? And then, at least for me as the recipient of some of those emails, I find them really hard to reply to, because I'm like, well, yeah, I'm interested, but I've also got questions A, B, C, and D that I can't really be bothered to write out an email or whatever, or like, yeah, I'd happily hear more if you could clarify A, B, and C. As soon as you have to put effort in as a very busy executive, your chances of them getting to respond decrease, the chances they're going to get distracted increase, etc., etc. You want to try and avoid that mental block. Again, the main takeaway, though, is that we want to message people based on an observable need for their business, and there's lots of different ways we can spot that. Here we're looking at their reviews, I guess, the reviews of their product. Last but not least, we've got deal.com. I don't know if anyone's based in London who's listening in. I think a few of you are, based on some of the names that I recognize, but Deal have recently plastered themselves all over Old Street tube station, so maybe you will be familiar with them. I think I wrote this before that was the case. I can't remember. Maybe it was subconscious. Maybe their advertising's working. But Deal is an employer of record solution, so they help folks hire globally in a compliant way. Some of you might be familiar with other companies or use them. So there's Deal, there's remote.com, there's Oyster HR, who are some friends of mine. They basically help folks hire globally and compliantly without having to set up legal entities or local HR teams. That's their core value proposition. So for them, if we were trying to write a kind of hyper-relevant email, I guess, we could say, hey company, I notice you guys are hiring across 4 locations as well as remotely right now. This is the thing that I observed about that business. What I know as Deal.com is when people do this, they struggle with compliance, right? This is the impact of the observation. This is the proof they have a need. And this is what I know about that need. Maybe some proof that I've solved it before. And then rather than another closed CTA, can I send you a clip of how we convert employment contracts into ones that work globally? I'm not sure I nailed the CTA here. Deal could produce a much better one than me based on the hardest element of hiring lots of locations. I don't know what that is myself. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how you can apply some of those observations and some of that relevancy into some of the emails. And there's some other tips and tricks that you can pick up on along the way. With me so far in terms of case studies? All good? Some nodding heads, yeah? Cool. So what does this mean from a funnel perspective, right? When we think about those examples, the email should still feel human, right? It shouldn't feel like we've been enrolled in like some mass newsletter. It should still feel like it's come from a person. It should still feel bespoke to me, right? It should feel like they've done some research into my G2 reviews or the currencies I support or the languages I support or who I'm hiring, right? Or check my hiring stats. It should still feel like some research has been done into the business, right? There's also no reason you couldn't introduce some elements of humor into some of these emails for people who are a lot funnier than I am. This is something we were doing really well in personalization, right? There's no reason that you can't do relevancy with some humor or a Spotify playlist, but by all means, right? Rather than humor, I've sometimes seen education happen where people have like benchmarked like performance of a company, included them in some of the stats. We can still make these things really interesting. But most importantly, the message is about what a company is demonstrating a need around versus a message which is purely personal, right? This is a hyper-relevant message. It should evoke the same reaction and the feelings as those that are personalized, but it should yield better end-to-end funnel performance, because the folks that are replying to the email aren't replying just because we're flattered that they've done some research into us or they want to send me a book. We're not taking the meeting when we don't have a need for the product. We're taking the meeting by engaging around a topic or a value proposition that you actually solve, right? Whilst maintaining all the benefits of personalization, such as maybe humor or having done research into the business, etc. I think we can merge some of the good stuff we're doing in personalization with the observable need, right? And this is really great because we can maintain really high response rates and meeting booked rates, which is what the BDRs are happy about and interested in. But hopefully we can also have happy founders, CROs, VP sales or whatever, because ultimately this should yield better end-to-end funnel performance and net new business. Long term, by winning customers based on a need that your product actually solves, you should hopefully see longer term, healthier customers too in delivering upon the promises we've made during the sales process. All in all, personalization has been working really well for all of us. And I think relevancy could be a great iteration on what's come before us. Make sense conceptually? Cool. All good. So as discussed, I don't think there are any silver bullets to outbound email. Like, I can't emphasize enough, the most impactful thing to drive improved performance is contacting the right customers at the right time with a message based on needs. That probably should have been in a slide in its own right as a summary. It's coming later. When we zoom in on subject lines or CTAs, we start to get into the real gray subjective view or objective success or statistical significance. I find some of the stats out there and some of this stuff quite difficult. And often the advice that you're given by the time it's shared or become widely known is too late and pretty useless. And I remember at one point a couple of years ago, there was the email that went around where you gave people like a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they had to reply with a number, and everybody was sending this email, right? By the time that you read about it, everybody was sending it. That being said, in preparing for this webinar, I do appreciate there is an unrelenting, insatiable appetite for advice around the topic of email. So I was trying to strike the balance here a little bit. So if there is a recipe that you want to go back and try at home, you're a better chef than me, here's what I'd encourage you to try or evolve or play with just based on what I've seen working for some others. So first, I'd always start an email without pleasantries. Again, maybe that's just subjective because I'm a miserable person. I nearly swore then, or anything irrelevant. We're all really busy. Instead, start with the observable need for the business, right? Like why you got in touch in the first place. I see you're hiring for role X. I see you're getting negative reviews about Y. Like what is it I've noticed about this business, which is why I'm contacting you? Next, I talk about the observation, the impact of that observation and the proof around you, how you kind of help solve it, I guess, right? When X observation is true, people struggle with Y. This is the type of statements you should be including. Or when X observation was true for company Y that we work with, we help them with Z. Keep it short and sweet, case studies, longer form content, all of that stuff can come later, right? If anything, if they're intrigued and reply to my email with like, how did you do this? Or can you send me some more information? This is absolute gold dust for me because I can reply being like, I'm happy to give you some more information over our Zoom call, right? This is actually what we're shooting for. You want to spark intrigue, but not give them everything in these first set of emails because we actually want to do the selling on the phone, not over email. And then lastly, I say phone, I'm using that interchangeably with Zoom and all the other modern technologies that are out there. Third, I would encourage you to try the closed CTA. It has worked for a lot of people really well, and try and make it as easy to reply to as a yes or a no. The goal of that first kind of touch outbound emails is a response, yes or no kind of style responses are very easy for us. And following that response, the chances of booking your meeting will go up. If we can make the CTA one that involves showing someone something, this can very quickly lead to a meeting because we're always going to do a better job of showing over an actual demo over Zoom or whatever it may be. The mistake I see people make a little bit on the closed question CTA is offering up content. They often say, can I send you through this case study or this long form bit of white paper that we've done on topic X? And when the customer applies yes to that, it's very difficult for you to justify that it being more effective to run them through that white paper over the call than just sending them the white paper for them to read. So content doesn't work super well. You could say, let me run you through the results or the analysis, like read it, and then we can run through your questions. But as a rule, I'd probably try to avoid content as your closed question CTA. That makes sense. You should have seen this kind of played out a little bit in some of the examples that we previously used for reference. Do adding your own flavor, your own tone, all of this stuff into these emails when you're having a play yourselves. Make sense in terms of a recipe you could try? Yeah. All good. Cool. Next, we're going to move on to some quick fire advice. Firstly, look at the dude on the right. How cute is he? Very cheeky. I'm trying to cram in as much value as I possibly can before the end of the year and ensuring you guys can learn from mine and others' mistakes. So I also wanted to include some quick fire pieces of advice on delivering hyper-relevant email or outbound email more generally. Boy, oh boy, do I love quick fire. I'm normally told to slow down 1,000 times over direct messages in the chat direct to me and then do a terrible job of it. So apologies already for quick fire advice. But to start with, your outbound email should look like they're being sent by a human, not by marketing, right? Per some of the things that we've seen in the chat, people are much more likely to reply if they feel that you as a BDR or a human have sent that message. The next thing I consider is, I run a company now, a good fit, that provides data on other companies that sales teams go and target. And sometimes we provide more information on those companies than the company knows about themselves, which is kind of wild. But there are always risks associated with programmatically gathered data, right? It is never 100% accurate. As a rule, at Good Fit, we try to ensure the data points we operate or offer are at 90% accuracy, but we're still wrong some of the time, right? And this is something you should bear in mind when referencing the things you've observed about a business or what you're including in that initial observation in your relevant email, right? Don't run with, hey, I see you're hiring for 567 open roles. Like, it's weird. Like, we'd never say that in conversation or get that specific. It's just odd. It seems like a computer has computed that message. Say, I see you're hiring for lots of people or over 500 people. Like, it should be human in tone, right? But next, don't necessarily run with, I see you're using NetSuite, right? You might know from your technographic data provider that they're using NetSuite, or you might think they're using NetSuite, but to protect yourself in your email, I'd say something like, hey, company, folks like you are typically using NetSuite. Now, we're pretty sure that they are, but in saying folks like you are typically using NetSuite and implying that, we just saves ourselves from looking silly, right? It's just a really basic tweak you can make without someone replying to you being like, actually, no, we're not using NetSuite and ending the conversation. And it just protects you a little bit from that particular outcome, because that happens. The third thing that I nearly stuck in as a slide on itself, because I spent a lot of time recently, is so many people base their entire email campaigns and their strategy around campaigns and cadences around changes in data, right? And this makes a lot of sense, right? If someone goes from like not hiring for a role to hiring for a role, like this is a great trigger to email them. Like in Paddle's case, they didn't have a head of payments and they started hiring a head of payments. Fucking awesome. Definitely swore, apologies. I want to email those people. Like, this is really exciting. Or in Deal's case, if someone went from hiring in 10 countries to 25, this is a great time to email them as that change happens, because this is when they have a really high need for your product, right? That's the right timepiece. But often the volume of those changes isn't typically high enough to feed your entire outbound sales team. We see similar issues with intent data. I could actually spend a long time talking about intent data, but for the people who are often relying on it in order to enroll someone in a campaign, often they just don't see enough signals to feed their entire team, right? So what I'd encourage you to try and do is, rather than building campaigns based on changes in the data, try and build your campaigns based on what is currently true about a company, right? Email them based on having over X employees rather than changing that figure. Or in Paddle's case, sticking with that case study 1 and 2, email them based on their current amount of international traffic or the amount of traffic they're getting from China, as opposed to an increase in the traffic they're getting from China. Feel free to do the latter. It's going to be really impactful because it feels really timely as a message. But if you can actually coordinate your campaigns to be based on what is true of a company at any given time, you're going to have a much broader range of companies, much higher coverage of companies you can actually enroll in these sequences. It means that at some point you can get to the point of having what I call like evergreen campaigns, whereby you're constantly enrolling companies in messaging that feels relevant based on what's true about them. And there's a really high volume of them, and those campaigns are working, cadences, whatever, and performing really well. Make sense? Nearly there on the quickfire advice. I'm running out of time. Next, strike the balance between nurture and close, right? I see some sales folks insistent they need to send like 15 emails before trying to book a meeting, or sending them 10 bits of content before asking for that meeting. And I appreciate some education or some warming up or some nurture of that account may be helpful and may be needed before someone jumps on the phone. But you need to strike the balance here, right? Don't be scared to ask for the meeting. Like, hearing no's are as helpful to move on to new prospects. If anything, they're more helpful than getting no response back. And if we're truly successful, identifying the right customers at the right time and sending them the right message, we can be quite forthright in asking them for their time, right? Like, I've noticed you've got this really big problem or this really big need, and here's how I help you solve it. Like, we should try and get that in front of them as soon as we possibly can. Last two, nail your tone. I see some emails written full of jargon in the Queen's perfect English with perfect grammar and punctuation. And this just isn't how we write emails to each other and to our peers. And these emails are meant to be written by our XDRs, right? As much as it's a template, it should feel like, remember, if we're doing our job rightly, that the XDR themselves has written this email, right? The next stage in the sales process is literally getting on the phone and speaking to the XDR. So if there's a massive disconnect between the tone that they're receiving over email and then the person they speak to on the phone, this is really weird. And it's not a great experience, I'd say, for the buyer. So you want to try and keep some level of consistency in that communication style and that tone from the email through to the discovery call, and hopefully throughout the end-to-end buyer journey, because you can really express yourselves and get your brand and your culture out there during the sales process, right? Make it a differentiator, make it fun to engage with you compared to your competitors. This is something people aren't doing enough. Often this mismatch occurs when product marketing, for example, are writing the outbound email as opposed to getting lots of info from the XDRs as to how they talk about this stuff. Last but not least, I don't like buyers self-evaluating whether they're a fit for my product. If you're creating a category or offering a complex product, typically buyers struggle to evaluate you, right? They maybe have some subconscious bias based on what's been in the market before, or they're comparing you to competitors, and it's very hard. Like, from our homepages, we all look really similar, perhaps. So I got pretty obsessed, and I think there's some subjective bias in here, don't get me wrong, about not letting the buyer self-determine whether they were a fit for my product, or allowing them to self-evaluate whether they should take the meeting. I didn't want them to do that on their own. So I didn't link them out to loads of content or my website or whatever in the emails. My absolute focus was, one, getting them to respond to my email, and then two, getting them on a Zoom call. I was going to supplement later in the buyer journey with case studies, long-form content, the ability to sign up and evaluate my product. And there's definitely some subjectivity here. This is definitely true depending on the complexity of your sales process, how much education is needed around your value proposition. That's not going to be true for everybody. Quick pause for breath. Any questions on that stuff before we kind of start to wrap and talk about outcomes and performance? Don't think there's anything in the chat. No, cool. So what should we expect in this evolution, I guess, from personalization to relevancy? Our emails should yield the same response and benefits we've seen from personalization, right? We can still be made to laugh. We should still feel like there's been a lot of research into us. We can even be flattered, right? However, rather than optimizing just for that response rate and some of those leading indicators like the sales executive meeting or the meetings booked, we should see that interest carry through to the close and beyond if they're engaging around a need that they have that our business can solve, right? Employing these methods at Paddle, we grew like 300% year on year for our first 5 years with outbound email as our sole channel. And we've more than today, but that's the only way we were going to market for the first 5 years. Now moving into 2023, I'm working with a ton of companies. I think some of them are in attendance today on their evolution to the hyper-relevant, right? And we're gathering a ton of data on the uplifts in conversion they're seeing, the improved win rates they're seeing at a slightly later stage, and in some cases, depending on how long we've been working together or how good their land and expand strategy is, the improved NRR of the companies that they've won through this hyper-relevant approach as opposed to the personal. I'm spending a lot of time gathering a lot of data on this right now. So you should expect more content on that on the Notion blog next year. I think we'll do a wrap-up or a summary of some of those findings. And if you subscribe to the content of this blog post on their site, normally there's a CTA, which is like subscribe to the materials for this. We'll be sure to get all of those numbers shared with you. That'll be no problem at all. If you'd like to get involved in that kind of study and test some of the relevancy stuff together, you can email me on harrison@goodfit.io and we can get you involved and see if it's going to be impactful and helpful for your businesses too. And if not, you can hold fire and see some of the numbers that we kind of produce next year around the change that we've seen.